Hi, my name is Doug Piper, and I'm a PhD student here in the Georgetown Early Learning Project, working with Dr. Rachel Barr. In this video, we're going to talk about parenting in the modern world, and more specifically, how early media exposure interacts with family well-being. We know that parenting looks quite different than it did 20 years ago, and parents in the United States believe that technology and media are the primary reasons for that change. To understand what this means for children's development, many studies have focused on the effects of technology, but it still remains unclear whether digital media is good or bad for children. I'll spend the next few minutes describing how researchers have studied trends in children's media use and how the Early Learning Project seeks to better understand this question. When considering media use with children, parents are often thinking about the amount of time or the quantity that children are spending, and they're also thinking about the content that children are watching. Shows like Sesame Street or Curious George are developmentally appropriate for preschoolers, meaning that they're created in ways that will be easier for young children to understand. The pace of the show is slow, so you think about Mr. Rogers and how slow he would talk to children, or Sesame Street, how methodical they are with presenting content. These shows also use tools like repeating phrases or other important information for kids to remember throughout the show. Media that are developmentally appropriate actually capture children's attention for longer, and children are better able to understand what's happening on the screen. Now, if you contrast the features I just talked about to features of a football game on TV, the football game is more fast-paced, actions just taking place constantly and sequentially across without any time to really go back and process what's going on. This can make it pretty bewildering for young kids. The context surrounding media use is also important. So this looks like, how children are using media with others. Context for media use can look different. So you can have a father looking at pictures with his child on his phone, likely talking about what's happening on screen. Video chat's also a different context, and it's a great way for families to supplement in-person interactions when those interactions can't take place in person for another number of reasons. A family member or a friend on the other side of the screen can respond to a young child in real time in appropriate ways as if they were there in person. Whereas characters on a video are not necessarily reacting directly to what a child viewer is saying or doing. Additionally, being able to both hear and see the other person makes it more interesting for young children than simply talking on the phone. Some of our work shows that this was an important and effective way for families to feel connected during the height of the pandemic. And another important context for media use that we may not think about as often is background TV. You may ask, why is this so bad? When observing children playing with a show on in the background, they can get distracted by loud noises that pop up every 30 seconds or so, or by talking on the show that's happening on screen. Children can't really understand what's happening on the screen when they're briefly looking away from what they're playing, and it takes a little bit of time for them to get back into whatever they were doing while they're playing. So, for example, if children are building a tower of blocks, they might get interrupted by a loud crash sound on TV or characters talking every 30 seconds or so, and that slows them down when they're building the tower. But also, when a child is asking for help and the TV is on, but the parent is watching, also getting distracted, the parent's going to be slower to respond to that child's bid for help. So parents who are watching the TV are less likely or slow to respond to their child when TV is going on in the background because there's also something to look at, which makes it different from just having background music that may not be as intrusive. When also thinking about media use, it's also important to consider adults' own media use when they're with their child. We call it technoference when devices interrupt interactions that are taking place in the real world. On average, parents are getting about 100 notifications each day on their mobile devices. And while being connected in this way can be helpful, for example, a parent being able to attend to work while also spending time with your child, if the checks of their phones are prolonged and the parent's attention is completely, absorbed by the phone, interactions between the parent and the child are disrupted. We know quite a bit about television programming and parent-child interactions, but at the Early Learning Project, we're also asking, what does media use look like in the context of daily family activities? And we're part of a global group of researchers also asking similar questions. So in the past, we have asked parents how many hours or minutes children spent using devices per day, and this measure of screen time isn't as precise as we necessarily want it to be. So a group of us set out to find ways to take into account all the different aspects of media use that I just mentioned, and this group is named for what we're trying to create, a comprehensive assessment of family media exposure, or CAFE. We employ 5 ways of measuring parenting experiences. We use the same questionnaire across sites to ask parents about their family pretty generally. And then we use daily surveys to get a more narrow look at media use and daily activities. These methods rely on parents remembering their media usage, which you may know from your own experience is pretty challenging to remember how often you're picking up your phone or checking Instagram or TikTok throughout the day. So we're using what is called passive sensing in a couple of different ways. We've worked with a group of developers to create an app called Chronicle that, with a parent's permission, shares with us for our research the information that's sent to Google every few seconds. This tracks what's being used on a phone broadly, like social media or messages, and not specific pages visited or the text of a message sent. This record, along with screenshots from the Screen Time app on iOS devices, gives us a more objective view of media use in families, not relying on parents remembering their own media use. However, we're not just interested in what children and parents are doing online, we're also interested in other activities. And so we use a time use diary for parents to record what their children did during the days of the study. This covers all these activities listed here, with the yellow slices representing those instances of media use. So from our measurement toolkit, we can find out what children are doing, how this changes between different age groups, as you see, toddlers and preschoolers here, and also what media are being used in the background of other activities, like playing inside or feeding and having mealtime together. So that's what we use to create or to collect this information. And I'm going to now show you some key findings from the past 8 years of our collaboration. So our collaborators in Italy looked at the relationship between media use and children's sleep habits and found that when there were more devices in the homes of children, they got less sleep at night. They also spent more time sleeping during the day. And so later in toddlerhood, children typically start sleeping less during the day, but with more media, this kind of typical trend in changes of sleep patterns is disrupted. Additionally, when parents use media more to occupy their child and children had more screen time during the day overall, children went to bed later and had less sleep at night. Often we hear that blue light exposure is a possible cause of these disruptions of typical sleep patterns, but it's actually not clear whether this phenomenon of blue light is contributing to changes in sleep or whether the nature of media use itself is a factor. So when you use it, how sporadic media use can be. However, from studies, we can recommend clearly to avoid watching screens before bed. Another area that the consortium has examined is language. So if you think about dinner time or bath time with a child and the amount of conversation that you have with your child when there are no distractions, when you're totally focused on that activity. This language exposure is important for children's learning of language, yet when there's more television or parent media use during meal times or other family chores, that language exposure is decreased. One strategy for avoiding decreases in language exposure when using media is joint media engagement, or actively using the same media along with your child. By talking about what's happening on a screen, adults can connect the content that's on the screen to the world surrounding their child. These rich interactions around media use are associated with positive language development outcomes for children. Lastly, we know that COVID was a major disruption in how families spent their time together and how they interacted with media. For children, adults, and even older adults, media usage increased during the pandemic. Data from our consortium have helped us understand what this change looked like for children. In Israel, where lockdowns were the same across the entire country and they were very systematically implemented and enforced, media use was measured during and after these lockdowns. During lockdown, children in the sample used more media, and media use continued to increase after lockdowns. This suggests that there was an adjustment to the new normal that developed during lockdowns, where beliefs about media use had shifted, making it a little bit more acceptable, and parents relied on it a little bit more. Further, more behavioral problems were associated with more media use during lockdowns, but the relationship didn't continue after lockdowns were lifted. Further analysis of this data from the consortium across different countries will tell us even more about children's media use during and after lockdowns. And so here are our key takeaways from all of this information presented. We often see headlines like these suggesting that media is the cause of negative outcomes for children. However, what we just discussed shows us that it really is not that simple. We need to take into account the content and context of media use, and further, we need to think about the whole family and how our own media usage as adults impacts children's interactions with media. And you can join us on this journey of finding out more information about children's media usage by following us on our social media. Here is our Instagram account and also that of our project lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can find more information also on our Facebook. And you can help us even further by joining one of our studies. We're researching children's media uses and parenting experiences in families with a 12 to 23-month-old child. You can scan the QR code here to see if you're eligible for the study, or you can visit our website for more information. Thank you for your time and your attention.